Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are embarking on an intellectual exploration that, quite frankly, is redefining the boundaries between hard quantitative science and the core questions of the humanities and social sciences.
It really is.
We're diving into a world where your ideas, your beliefs, your collective ideology, they're no longer these sort of soft, qualitative concepts. They are mathematically quantifiable forces that actually shape physical reality.
That's right. And this deep dive is, I think, custom-tailored for you, the researcher in sociology, political science, history, or development studies.
Exactly.
If you're someone who just intuitively understands that concepts like social norms or collective fear drive real-world outcomes, but maybe you've struggled to find a robotic language to model them formally.
Yeah, a way to put numbers to it.
Precisely. Our source material today, a really seminal 2011 economic paper by Seong-Hoon Kim, gives us exactly that language.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to unpack the collision of two pretty complex mathematical frameworks, DSGE and POMDP.
Which sound intimidating, I know.
They do. But we're going to reveal how their synthesis provides this groundbreaking new tool. And the core insight we're chasing is this. This paper mathematically formalizes the idea that what we believe about the world fundamentally and physically changes the world itself. Belief in this model becomes a causal agent. It has like a physical force.
It does. And, for decades, quantitative modeling, especially in macroeconomics, it really struggled to integrate these genuine psychological or sociological phenomena.
Some are just noise. Right.
They were just noise, or they were relegated to external shocks or some kind of irrationality. This new architecture, though, it provides the mathematical rigor to bring concepts like perception, trust, and even Keynes' animal spirits directly into the core equations of a rational model.
So it's not irrational anymore.
It's not. It's the ultimate feedback loop.
Yeah.
How we know the world, our epistemology, dictates how the world actually exists.
And to give you a preview of the specific, tangible reality we're studying today, we're leaving that idealized world of perfect information way behind.
Far behind.
We are diving headfirst into a world of what the paper calls flight in the fog. In this environment, every decision you make based on imperfect, partial information isn't just a reaction to reality. It's an active determinant of future reality.
And we're going to show you, with the model's own simulation, how a tiny collective delusion can lead to a very real, very painful 25-year economic hangover.
Okay, let's unpack this concept of the fog, because establishing this new core reality is, I think, the prerequisite for the entire model transformation. This is what really separates this work from, most of the quantitative modeling that came before it.
Right. The paper starts by affirming a premise that is, it's just self-evident to any social science researcher.
Sure.
Most important decisions, whether you're talking about finance, policy, or just social interaction, they're made under conditions of imperfect information and fundamental uncertainty.
You can't see everything.
You can't see the true state of the world with perfect clarity. If we could, a lot of the complex phenomena studied in sociology and political science just wouldn't even exist.
That's fascinating. So the paper doesn't invent a new term for this. It actually borrows its core conceptual structure from a totally different field.
Yeah, from artificial intelligence and robotics research, which is so interesting. This is the partially observable Markov Decision Process, or POMDP.
POMDP.
That acronym, it describes the mathematical environment that, it turns out, accurately reflects the messy, real world we all have to navigate.
So what makes a world a POMDP world?
A POMDP environment is defined by two crucial defining characteristics that, when you put them together, they create all this complexity.
Okay.
First, observation NO. We cannot perfectly or fully see the true state of the world. The information we get is partial, it's noisy, maybe it's delayed.
And the second?
Second, control, yes, S. And this is the vital social science element. Our actions are not irrelevant. They genuinely determine the world's future state. Our decisions have real causal power.
Okay, so let's focus on the metaphor, because I think it makes these technical terms instantly gettable. The pilot flying through the fog. This is the defining image of the POMDP agent.
It is. Picture that pilot. They're in the cockpit, completely surrounded by thick cloud cover. They cannot see the true altitude, the terrain, or the ground below.
That's the observation NO.
That's the observation NO. They can't perfectly know the true state of their environment. But, and this is the crucial part, they are not passive. They are the commander of the aircraft.
Right. They're still flying the plane.
They're still flying the plane. If the pilot pulls the lever, adjusts the flaps, changes the engine thrust. That action immediately changes the plane's real position, its altitude, its velocity. That is control.
Yes.
Their decisions are dynamically causal, even though they're based on filtered, imperfect data from their instruments.
And the source material highlights this dynamic, this sort of two-way street, so beautifully. It defines the environment as one in which our chosen actions influence the transition of the states that are not completely observable. This is the exact dynamic that social scientists have, intuitively understood for a long time, that our perception of reality feeds back to create that reality. But we've always lacked the formal mathematical language to model it rigorously.
Until now.
Mm.
And the strength of this framework for our audience, for you, is its broad applicability. It's not just about central banks or stock markets.
No.
It applies to any complex social dynamic where these invisible drivers meet visible outcomes.
So let's ground this in some real-world examples. Let's start with scenario 1, climate change. This is a powerful application, right? It spans environmental science, political science, economics, and it fits the POMDP structure perfectly.
Absolutely. So on the observation side, we face a classic observation NO. Despite, trillions spent on research, we do not know the Earth's true tipping point exactly.
We have models, but they're not perfect.
They're just models. The ecosystem is too vast, too nonlinear, and way too complex for perfect observation. It's an unobservable, or at best a partially observable state variable.
But the causality is undeniable. We absolutely have control. Yes.
We do.
Our collective consumption decisions today, our policy actions or, our inactions and our huge infrastructure investments, they genuinely change the trajectory and the arrival time of the tipping point.
Exactly. That invisible state, the climate's true resilience, is constantly being modified, delayed, or maybe accelerated by our very observable actions.
So a researcher could use this framework to model agents who are rationally adjusting their consumption based on imperfect climate models.
Where their collective adjustments actually change the parameters of the climate model itself. It becomes a closed loop.
Wow.
Now let's consider another one, scenario 2, social trust. If you're studying development economics or sociology or comparative politics, trust is maybe the single most important and yet least visible public good.
For sure. And it's classic observation NO. An external investor, a political observer, even a local community member, they can't know the true aggregate social trust level of a community.
How could you?
You can't. You have to rely on proxy signals. Maybe you see crime statistics or data on civic participation or qualitative things like the broken windows phenomenon.
All of which are imperfect, noisy signals about that hidden state of trust.
But here is the critical control YS element. If that investor decides to withdraw their capital based on their belief that trust is low, say, they see some broken windows and decide the community is declining.
Right.
That action of capital withdrawal reduces employment, it cuts infrastructure funding, it limits opportunities. That action, driven by a belief, genuinely worsens the community's actual employment and crime rates, which are the future observable states.
You've just described this self-fulfilling prophecy, but in the language of the model.
Exactly. The model formally shows how it works. The withdrawal of investment, which is rooted in a belief about low trust, precipitates the decline in real trust and real economic output.
The POMDP framework lets us model that entire causal chain. Observation leads to belief, which leads to action, which leads to a change in reality. Without this architecture, trust would just remain an exogenous, unmodelable factor. With it, trust becomes a dynamic internal state variable that you could actually design policy to address.
So we've established that we, as social agents, live in this POMDP world. We're all in the fog.
We are.
But for most of the past century, and certainly during the heyday of the Neoclassical economics, the standard models used by economists basically assumed the fog wasn't there.
They assumed perfect visibility.
Which brings us to the model that needed this POMDP generalization. The DSGE model.
The DSGE model, or Dynamic Stochastic General Equilibrium model. It really is the foundational tool of modern macroeconomics. It's used to simulate a virtual world of households, firms, and governments.
And it's primarily for forecasting business cycles and evaluating policy.
That's right. It's about figuring out the effectiveness of monetary and fiscal policy.
Okay, let's break down those components, because I think the complexity of the original framework is important to appreciate what the POMDP generalization really achieved.
Good idea.
Dynamic just means the model tracks variables and decisions as they change over time.
Hmm.
Stochastic means the model accounts for random, unpredictable events or shocks. So think of things like a pandemic, a sudden change in technology, or an unexpected change in global oil prices.
And general equilibrium is the key architectural concept. It means the model is seeking a state where everything is interconnected, all markets clear, supply meets demand across all sectors at the same time, subject to everyone's constraints and objectives.
The DSGE framework itself is pretty robust for studying how these real shocks propagate through the system.
It is.
But the flaw, the one that crippled its ability to incorporate human beliefs, was this core assumption that was baked into the early and most common versions.
Which was?
Agents were assumed to be able to see through the true state of a world. They had a God's eye view.
Exactly. This assumption created what is known as perfect information, or full rational expectations, in its most simplified form. It just stipulated that rational agents always knew the true structure of the economy, the true amount of capital in the system, and the true impact of any policy.
Which sounds a little bit absurd when you say it out loud.
Well, it was mathematically convenient for solving these incredibly complex optimization problems. But it completely excluded the problems of belief, perception, and misvaluation from the core analysis.
Because if you have the true model, you don't need a belief.
A truly rational agent, armed with the true model, has no need for a belief that differs from the truth. Belief becomes irrelevant.
So because these DSGE models required mathematically simple environments, traditional economics effectively reduced the complex reality of our POMDP world into two overly simplified, almost mythological worlds.
Right, they ignored the nuanced middle ground where most of our social interactions actually happen.
And what were those two worlds?
World 1, MDP, the chess player. This is the world of observation yes plus control yes. This is the simplest possible Markov decision process.
The chess player analogy is perfect for this. The agent perfectly observes the location of every single piece on the board, the complete state of the world. That's observation yes. And when they move a piece, they take an action that directly determines the next state of the board. That's control yes.
And most older, highly simplified Markovian DSGE models fit right into this MDP class. The paper points out that this required treating agents as omniscient, rational gods.
Right.
In this world, the entire system is deterministic, except for those external shocks. And the concept of subjective belief is totally irrelevant because your belief is always identical to objective truth. It's great for modeling simple, transparent games, but it's terrible for modeling social reality.
Okay, so that's one extreme. Then they tried to introduce imperfect information, which led to the other extreme.
Right. World 2. HM, the passive meteorologist.
Okay.
This is the world of observation NO plus control NO.
So here, we at least acknowledge the fog exists.
We do. The passive meteorologist sees imperfect signals, a shifting barometer, noisy satellite data, that's observation NO. They can't see the true comprehensive weather system.
Right.
But their core flaw is a total lack of causality. Their forecast, or any action they take, like, say, wearing a coat, does absolutely nothing to change the fundamental state of the weather's future.
So control NO.
Control NO. Their only job is signal extraction, just trying to guess the true hidden state of the weather system purely for their own information. They're just watching.
And that really highlights the historical limitation. Even when imperfection was introduced with frameworks like the hidden Markov model or HMM, the agents often just remained passive recipients of shocks.
Yeah, their expectations might have been rational, but their actions had no aggregate causal effect on the system itself, which made them pretty much irrelevant observers. And that's fundamentally unsatisfying for any social scientist who inherently deals with issues of agency and social causality.
So that's the fundamental schism. For decades, DSGE created a world where agents were either perfect controllers who saw the truth, the MDP world,
The chess players.
or they were passive observers who saw noise but couldn't really act on it effectively, the HMM world.
Meteorologists.
The POMDP is revolutionary precisely because it validates the social scientific reality. We are imperfect observers, observation NO, whose actions fundamentally change the system we are observing, control, yes. We are the pilot in the fog, where the difficulty isn't just in seeing, but in knowing that our blind actions have lasting, real consequences.
So we arrive at the core solution presented in the Kim paper. If the old DSGE model, by its very nature, couldn't handle this real world of partial observability and agency, How do we bridge that gap?
Right, if the pilot can't see the ground and their actions matter, what does anchor their decision-making?
What anchors the decision is the pilot's instrument panel. It's their interpretation of the imperfect, noisy data they're receiving.
I see.
The revolutionary insight brought from the POMDP literature into macroeconomics is that we don't optimize our actions based on the true state, the invisible ground. We optimize based on our belief about the true state, the reading on the instrument panel.
This feels like the moment where economics formally embraces psychology.
I think it is. The paper takes the agent's inner state human belief and formalizes it as the mathematical foundation for how they select their actions.
And this creates what we can call the dynamic belief-action-reality feedback loop, which is the new operational heart of this POMDP generalization.
It is. It's a continuous, dynamic, and recursively causal cycle.
Okay, walk us through the steps. Step 1.
Step 1. Imperfect observation. The agent observes the current reality, which is always partial and noisy. This could be seeing imperfect economic data, reading a misleading market price, or observing a single broken window in a complex neighborhood.
Okay, then step 2. Belief formation.
The agent processes this imperfect observation to update their internal state. They synthesize the noisy data using principles of rational inference, like Bayesian updating, to form a conviction, a belief about the true state. For instance, based on the barometer, I believe the true pressure is dropping rapidly.
Step 3 is action.
The agent then selects the optimal action based entirely on that updated belief. They solve an optimization problem. What's the best thing to do given my current conviction?
I believe I'm too low, so I pull up on the lever.
Precisely. They pull the lever or they withdraw their investment based on the expectation that their belief is true.
And finally, step 4. Reality changes.
The chosen action directly changes the true state of the physical world. The plane's actual altitude shifts, or the community's real crime rate worsens. This new, altered reality then feeds back into the system, and the agent begins the cycle all over again with a new set of imperfect observations.
The profound mathematical leap here is the formalization of the invisible. The paper elevates human belief, which it denotes as ETTT, to a core state variable that has to be tracked right alongside physical quantities.
And this is so crucial. In the old DSGE model, the state variable might just be TKT, representing the physically measurable stock of capital, like factories and machines.
Right.
But the new POMDP state is a vector. It includes the real capital and the agent's optimal belief about the real capital. By putting the expectation operator ATD inside the state vector itself, the entire optimization problem becomes recursive and dependent on cognitive management.
So agents are now optimally managing their own cognitive process as a core part of the market dynamic.
That's a perfect way to put it.
This blending of the physical and the cognitive leads us to what might be the most profound implication for researchers in the social sciences, the point where modeling meets philosophy, the formal concept of the fixed point.
Absolutely. Traditional general equilibrium was a pretty static concept. The world converges to a single true state defined by the intersection of preferences and constraints. It was an objective state ontology dictating epistemology.
The world is what it is, and we just try to see it.
Exactly. But in this new POMDP model, the equilibrium is mathematically defined as a fixed point of an operator that maps what we observe into what we believe.
Okay, let's slow down and translate that for everyone. If we're aiming for a deep dive, this concept is central. What does it actually mean for the equilibrium to be a fixed point of an operator?
An operator here just means a rule, a function. In simple terms, the system reaches stability, the fixed point, when the way agents rationally know the world, their epistemology, which is defined by that operator, when that results in an action that creates a reality, the ontology, that, when they observe it, confirms their initial knowledge. It's a closed-loop consistency. It isn't necessarily a truth.
So, the way we know the world, our methods of observation, inference, social interpretation, our epistemology, directly structures the way the world exists, the ontology.
Yes.
So the economic system doesn't necessarily converge to the perfect truth. It converges to a fixed point where our belief-driven actions are self-consistent with the reality those actions generate.
This is the massive shift. Traditional economics assumed truth was the destination. This framework posits that the destination is stable, self-consistent belief, regardless of whether that belief perfectly mirrors the true, unobservable state.
And this allows us to formally model things like societal consensus or collective norms or shared ideology.
Not as external forces, but as the stable, self-reinforcing fixed points of the POMDP system itself.
This raises a critical question for balance, though. If the complexity is driven by this new belief variable, ETKT, how is this model actually solved? Doesn't turning belief into a vector component make the system incredibly complex and maybe computationally intractable, limiting its use for practical policy analysis?
That is an excellent and necessary challenge. The initial assumption of perfect information made the older models easy to solve analytically.
Sure.
Introducing the belief vector makes the entire problem non-linear and much, much more challenging. The solution can't be found statically. Instead, the POMDP class relies on finding optimal sequential beliefs. It's a recursive process.
And this is where a specific computational tool, the modified Kalman filter, comes into play, correct?
Precisely. The Kalman filter is the mathematical mechanism the agents use for optimal inference. It's how the agent takes the noisy observation from step 1 and optimally updates their internal belief state in step 2 over time. It's a recursive filtering process where the optimal action at time to 2 depends on the optimal belief state at time to the $, which itself depends on the history of all noisy observations.
And the source materials confirm the computational cost is high.
It is. Solving the DSGE with POMDP typically requires hundreds of iterations. For instance, the paper mentions 221 iterations to converge to the fixed point, compared to maybe a dozen for the simpler HMM models.
So the answer is yes, it's computationally more demanding.
It is, but that cost reflects the reality of optimal cognitive management under uncertainty. For the researcher audience, this confirms that modeling belief isn't just a philosophical add-on. It requires a fundamentally different, dynamic, and computationally expensive solution architecture.
Now let's move from the abstract math and computational complexity to the concrete and, frankly, shocking consequences. To demonstrate the physical force of belief, the paper runs a virtual experiment that replaces a traditional real shock, like a war or an oil price spike, with a purely cognitive event.
A perception shock.
Right, and the setup is deliberately simple and powerful.
Very. They simulate a perfectly stable baseline economy. No real changes in technology or resources. Into this stable system, they introduce a shock, a 1% inference error in valuation of capital.
1%. We really need to stress how tiny that initial cognitive deviation is. It's almost imperceptible.
It's small, but it's collective and it's systemic. Every rational agent in the economy, without any change to the real physical economy, suddenly believes that the nation's total capital stock, its infrastructure, housing, factories, is 1% more valuable than it truly is.
The paper calls this a misperceived wealth effect.
Or what we might just call a collective systemic delusion. They didn't get richer. They simply believe they got richer.
So let's look at phase 1. This shows the immediate translation of that belief into physical action. If rational agents believe they are suddenly wealthier, how do they immediately adjust their lives according to the simulation?
Well, since their decisions are rational given their false belief, they immediately adjust their consumption and labor based on what they perceive to be a higher lifetime wealth. Figure 1 from the source material details the immediate results.
And we see that consumption immediately rises by a pretty substantial amount, 0.57%. People feel wealthy, so they immediately shift their spending habits upwards.
They start consuming wealth that doesn't actually exist.
And at the same time, we see this crucial real-world effect. Labor immediately falls. Why?
Because the agents believe they are richer, the relative value of leisure increases. They realize they can achieve their lifetime wealth targets by working less. They choose to enjoy their imagined wealth today by taking more time off.
And the immediate, undeniable physical consequence of that.
Production immediately decreases. The moment the collective belief shifts, real physical output drops because the workforce is choosing leisure over production. The economy is now worse off in physical terms purely because of a cognitive shock.
That's the immediate paradox the POMDP model captures so clearly. The belief state is highly optimistic, it's driving a consumption spree, yet the real physical output is already getting worse.
Yeah.
The agents are disinvesting in their physical future to enjoy an imagined financial present.
So phase 1 is the party. Phase 2 is the inevitable correction, the hangover. And this is where the model truly demonstrates the long-term causal power of belief.
Right. The wrong actions, the increased consumption and reduced saving and investment, they don't just create a temporary fluctuation, they permanently scar the real economy.
Since agents consumed more and worked less, there is a fundamental decrease in saving and investment in the physical stock of capital. The nation's actual capital, the physical infrastructure, the machinery, it begins to shrink. The paper terms this process the decumulation in capital.
So the false belief has generated a true poverty. The belief-action-reality cycle locks in this negative spiral.
It does. A false belief we are 1% richer, leads to a wrong action, consume more, invest less, which leads to a true reality. Actual measurable capital decreases. The nation becomes truly poorer because of a fleeting, imagined wealth increase.
And the duration of this hangover is just staggering. The simulation tracks the system's return to its original fixed point. The consumption spree lasts a relatively short 15 quarters, so almost 4 years.
Yeah.
But the economy takes more than 100 periods, that's 25 years, to fully return to its initial stable state. A quarter-century-long recessionary shadow rooted entirely in a collective misperception about valuation.
And this timescale is so crucial for our audience. It proves that belief isn't just a driver of short-term volatility. It causes deep, structural, long-term damage.
And the simulation confirms why the correction is so slow. Remember the computational difficulty we talked about?
Yeah, the 221 iterations.
Exactly. The convergence of the optimal belief rule itself is inherently slow and costly. It takes all those iterations for the complex POMDP solution to resolve the ambiguity created by the misperception, compared to just 12 for the simpler HMM model. Systemic delusion is mathematically hard to unlearn.
It also raises a really profound methodological point. The source material notes that this optimal sequential beliefs rule, which the POMDP relies on, cannot incorporate unperceived misperception.
What does that mean, unperceived misperception?
It means that if the agents themselves cannot rationalize the source of that 1% error, if they don't even know they're making a mistake, the damage can be even worse or longer lasting. If a flaw in social trust or capital valuation is so deeply embedded that it's invisible to the agents themselves, the correction period could theoretically extend far beyond 25 years.
Wow. And this simulation, it's not merely academic. It feels like a rigorous quantitative mapping of events we have all witnessed in modern history.
I think it maps almost perfectly to the 2007 financial crisis.
The crisis started not with an oil shock or a pandemic, but with a massive shared perception shock. The collective belief that housing prices never fall was, in essence, a systemic overvaluation of collateral, a very specific form of the 1% inference error on capital valuation simulated in the paper.
And this widespread belief drove the wrong actions. Reckless lending, securitization based on faulty assumptions, overconsumption fueled by extracting equity from inflated assets, and massive faulty investment in complex derivatives. All of these actions were rational given the belief.
Those actions then inevitably led to real capital destruction. The collapse of the financial architecture harmed the real economy, leading to job loss, factory closures, and a massive destruction of real physical and human capital.
And the resulting hangover was precisely that decade-plus recessionary period. The POMDP model provides the rigorous mathematical framework to show how a psychological consensus, a shared belief, can transition into a decades-long period of physical pain and resource decumulation entirely within a rational expectations framework.
So we don't have to invoke irrationality to explain the crisis.
We don't. We just have to recognize the consequences of imperfect observation.
So for our audience, the crucial takeaway here isn't just the mathematics, but the validation of their core research interests. The central message of this work is transformational.
It is.
Concepts previously deemed too esoteric or difficult to quantify, like belief, perception, norms, ideology, social capital, they are now treatable as measurable core state variables within a rational expectations framework.
The POMDP framework offers a robust, powerful new language for analyzing that transition from the invisible cognitive drivers to the visible, measurable outcomes. This is the bridge many social scientists have been looking for between rich, qualitative analysis and rigorous quantitative modeling.
And one of the most exciting potential applications the paper notes is the ability to finally dissect Kin's concept of animal spirits mathematically.
Right. Animal spirits, that spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction, often invoked to explain waves of optimism or pessimism.
It was the quintessential vague psychological concept that old DSGE models had to just push to the side.
They had to. Traditional models could only handle real shocks, but the paper successfully integrates this. It suggests that POMDP can rigorously analyze animal spirit-like causes that underlie aggregate fluctuations within a full rational expectations framework.
Okay, so let's apply this to the classic bubble scenario in finance, which is so often dismissed as just irrational exuberance. How does this model see it?
Well, in the POMDP world, the bubble becomes a consequence of rational inference.
Interesting. So the bubble is driven by two key POMDP states.
Exactly. The unobservable state, which is the asset's true intrinsic value, and the observable signal, which is the market price.
And the feedback loop is the engine.
The feedback loop is the engine. Investor A observes a price rise. That's the signal. Because A can't see the true value, A rationally updates their belief. They think the intrinsic value must be rising, or the market knows something I don't.
So A takes the optimal action and buys more.
And here is the key difference from older models that relied on noise traders or some random irrationality. A's buying actually raises the price. It changes reality,
And now investor B sees that higher price.
which reinforces B's belief. So B buys more, and the cycle just accelerates. It is a self-validating, rational herding mechanism driven by the necessity of filtering noisy information.
So the profound implication here is that bubbles might not be the result of irrationality at all.
They might be a perfectly rational outcome of the feedback loop between an unobservable truth and an observable yet misleading signal. This model validates all that research that focuses on informational cascades and collective signaling in social dynamics.
And the paper's concluding remarks, they outline specific areas where this POMDP model will open new scientific avenues, and they're directly relevant to researchers across the humanities and social sciences.
They are. First, in economic growth. This framework allows researchers to inspect the misallocation of resources when agents rely on market prices that reflect optimal beliefs, but not necessarily objective truth.
So you could study something like a tech bubble, where too much money flows into one sector.
At the expense of real, long-term capital formation, simply because the agent's belief state prioritizes short-term returns. It offers a rigorous alternative to just labeling that kind of misallocation as a policy failure.
Okay, what's second?
Second, global climate change. We touched on this earlier, but the paper explicitly calls the POMDP a natural platform for studying the feedback mechanism, where the ecosystem, the unobservable or poorly understood state, interacts dynamically with human activity, the action.
And the challenge there is even more complex.
It is because, as the paper notes, the state transition itself, how the client actually responds to a unit of CO2, may be unknown. That makes the observation channel even murkier and the belief formation even more critical.
So researchers could model the societal consensus around climate action as a fixed point that's driven by incomplete scientific information.
Precisely. And third, it allows for modeling time-varying parameters. This is huge for history and sociology researchers who study periods of structural change or regime switching.
Like a sudden shift in political ideology or social norms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The POMDP offers a framework for examining those animal spirit-like causes fully within a rational framework. It lets researchers formally model how an invisible psychological shift can manifest as a measurable, lasting structural change in the economy or society, rather than just describing it qualitatively.
This means we can now quantify the transition cost of ideology. Ideology, social norms, collective trust. These are no longer externalities to be dismissed. They are quantifiable state variables that possess real, measurable power.
And this framework provides the tool to measure that power. And for our audience, the most compelling aspect is that this move away from the God's eye view validates the complexity inherent in their work. The social world is defined by incomplete information and causal agency. And finally, we have a mathematical language that accepts that premise as its starting point.
We have completed a journey today that moved from the idealized, all-seeing world of the chess player
The MDP world.
and the passive world of the meteorologist
The HMM world.
into the far more realistic, messy, and foggy world of the pilot, the POMDP world. The central realization, provided by Kim's work, is that the fog, the partial observation, the uncertainty, it's not a bug in our system. It's the defining essential feature of social and economic reality.
And the final synthesis for you, the researcher, is this. To understand the state of the economy, or the trajectory of political polarization, or the persistence of poverty in a community, we must first and foremost understand the state of human belief about those systems.
Yeah.
By formalizing belief as a core, measurable state variable, this framework provides the scientific means for experts in the humanities and social sciences to analyze that profound, recursive relationship between invisible perception and visible, tangible reality.
This brings us back to that initial staggering consequence. Here is a final provocative thought for you to carry back to your current field of research. We saw that a mere 1% collective misperception about capital value can lead to a 25-year actual recession, a physical destruction of wealth lasting for decades.
Now, consider your own work. What unperceived misperception, a deeply ingrained flaw in belief about, perhaps, social stability or resource scarcity, or the nature of identity, or the efficacy of a political system, what misperception might your current field of study be modeling incorrectly right now, simply because the flaw is invisible to the agents themselves?
And the source material sternly reminds us that the optimal belief rules the POMDP uses cannot account for that unperceived misperception.
They can't.
So if a core structural belief in your research area is fundamentally flawed, and the flaw itself is unperceived by the agents in your model, how long is that real-world hangover going to be, and what is the current hidden cost of that systemic delusion?
That is the rigorous, unsettling question this new modeling language allows us to finally start asking, a critical question for a world navigating perpetual uncertainty.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.